And the best we can bring to it will be the results of that. You can study what you can find out about film technique. But I think if you're a fine composer, writing well for orchestra and other means of sound production, with very little, with good instincts and a little instruction, you'll have all the preparation you need. Our best composers write our best film scores and our best theater scores, our best concert scores. Assuredly, a lot of you will be among them. So with that as a kind of a basis of a little history and some point of view, we can maybe take some of your questions or have a discussion with John.
What I'd like to do, if I could, John, is kick it off with a few questions from my point of view before we open it up to the Q&A. And I know that this room has dozens of questions for you. I'm curious about your initial impulses to compose. When you started as a pianist over at Columbia, did you think in terms of, because you'd already arranged and orchestrated some, did you think at that point that maybe being a pianist was a means to an end, that being a composer was really what you wanted?
No, I don't think so. I wrote little pieces as a teenager. I remember writing a wind quintet and fragments of what might have been a piano sonata, I guess. But I didn't have it in my mind that I could earn a living as a composer, if I put it that way, or that particularly I would be a film composer. I was already doing orchestrations for people working in film before I had any particular burning desire to do it myself. It just was, in my case, a kind of evolution.
So it was a natural kind of thing. Was there a point at which you said, you know, I'd really rather be writing?
Yes, in that sense, very much so. When I went to Universal, after the Columbia Pictures experience, I really, you bring it up as a point of memory really to me that I actually got frustrated playing in the orchestra. I was doing a lot of freelance playing. I remember the last big recording that I did was West Side Story with John Green, I think. And I can remember going home saying to my wife, if I could possibly earn enough money for our family working at Universal, I don't want to play anymore. So I did reach a point where session work, so to speak, which everyone will understand, I guess, recording session work became not challenging, I guess.
And when you went to Universal, that was to work for Stanley Wilson.
Correct.
At review. Right. Did Stanley seek you out? Did he say, John, I've heard you play, I've heard you orchestrate? How did that come about?
Well, I don't remember the particulars, John, so long ago, but what I can tell you is it's hard to imagine that there was a musicians' union contract at that time which stipulated that every television segment was produced in Hollywood had to be scored live, with 3 musicians or 60. But the studios were signatories to this agreement. So Stanley Wilson's stage was, we had 3-hour sessions for each show, and there were 3 a day, usually 6 days a week and sometimes 7 to cover. If you look at the show listing those years, and realize so we could piggyback some shows. We had a comedy with 10 minutes or 8 minutes of music, we could do 2 of them in 3 hours. But Stanley was looking for anybody who could write anything. He would, if this situation, this is take the whole class here and say, you're all going to work. You know, the need was so great. The contracts have now changed. You can score with a synthesizer, and you don't have to go near a live performance thing. But in those years, studios had been to repeat were signatures to the musicians' union agreement, and that made a lot of work for a lot of people, particularly young people like myself at that time, who would work for relative peanuts, and we were happy to do it.
Something else you said I thought was interesting, and that was the whole idea of being a good composer before you start to think of in terms of being a theater composer or a film composer or a composer of concert music. Do you think that the lines are more blurred now than they were 10 or 15 years ago because people like Tam Dunn and John Curigliano and Philip Glass have come in and started to do films, that what used to be a kind of academic snobbery about film music that wasn't very good and didn't deserve to be discussed in the same breath as a concert piece. Do you think those lines are blurring now and that maybe there is a little bit more respect for film music?
Well, I think very much, John. And I think a session like this is an illustration of that point. I mean, a lot of you people, these are probably all postgraduate people, some of which may be interested in film, some of them may be, and others may not be. But I think people who are studying music composition now all want to know something about film. They may want to write for the theater or for the educational area or concert, but I think they see film as a legitimate avenue for expression for composers. That wasn't the case 40, 50 years ago. Any serious composition professor would say that you don't have any truck with commercial media music. You'd be degrading the art by doing it. And on that point, I think something very profound and interesting has happened. I'll just take a moment to tell you this if I can. Film music is, 75 years old, which is nothing in history. It's a blink. It's a new trick. And a new art, in a way, if it is an art. And when it began in the late 20s and early 30s, the composers here were from Europe, as you all know, and nobody had any idea how to accompany these films. There was no tradition for it. It had never been done before. And so the only examples they had would be to take art music from Europe, i.e. Wagner, Brahms, Weber, whatever you could pick as a kind of example of what might be done, incidental music from mostly 19th century opera. So that the examples for medium music in those years came from the art music of Europe. What's happened now is a kind of flip. It's relevant to your question. You have composers like John Adams, for example, and others who create what is art music, the inspiration for which can be largely medium noise or medium music or a pop racket or jazz racket or whatever. And that's an exact flip of what composers were facing in their challenges in the early 1930s. So that change, which is a result of communication, the internet, the long-playing record, the CD, all the things that have made it possible to disseminate music from all over the world, more and more people, music education and so on. So that I think it's a very different situation than it was 40 or 50 years ago, and a much healthier one. The very serious, highly idealized music people dedicated to the art of music, not particularly interested in media racket of any kind. Almost all are interested in audiovisual coupling and combination, as if nothing else, as a threat to the pure oral art of music alone, which is, we all think, the highest expression, or music theater at least. So it is a very different world, and very serious, excellent younger people interested in it, to some degree maybe respecting it a little bit more than maybe it deserves, and willing to apply their own talents to it if they choose to. One of the things that, it's a big subject, it's part of the answer has to be that in Europe it was not the same. This snobism we talk about here was a particularly North American thing, which had to do with Eurocentrism mostly. Because in Europe, in England, for example, Arnold Bax, William Walton, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Benjamin Britten, the best musical brains in the country, were doing film scores. Equally true in Russia, as we all know, to a certain extent Germany, except for the war interrupted what I think would have been a natural progress of very excellent people in music going into film. It was part of the American intellectual inferiority complex to make that separation that we made all those decades, I believe. It's changing greatly. I think this meeting is one evidence of it.
I'm also curious to know, because you've written a number of concertos and other large-scale works that have nothing to do with visual imagery, can you talk about the different challenges of working in the concert music field versus working in film?
Well, working in the concert music field, as everybody here knows, I think would agree, is much harder than, put it that way, much more difficult than writing for film in the sense that you sit down with a blank piece of paper without a subject, without time parameters, without any givens whatsoever, and the sky's the limit. Nobody's stopping you from being Stravinsky if you have the gift to do it. And therefore, the challenge is much greater. In film assignment, we can break down the film and pick an area that we sort of spot, and we can see that it's 3 minutes, and we can see that it's soft here and loud there, and it quickens over here, and it slows down over there, and there's a quick acceleration and crescendo here are 3 minutes and 2 seconds, and you can almost make it at least from the point of view of dynamics and rhythmic gestalt of the sequence, a lot of givens before you put one note down. So clearly, it's in my mind at least much less of a challenge. And the concert works that I've done have been mostly exercises in self-exploration, in I guess you could say, education, entertainment between the film assignments, if you like. The reason I've written more concerti than anything else is because I form love affairs with particular soloists, as we all do. You know, the opportunity to write for Yo-Yo, for example. Well, how could you not do that? It's like quickly go home and make a concerto as quickly and as well as you can. So that's part of it, because they're bringing their personality and their gifts and the opportunity to have a performance by them. So they're very separate functions. The obvious differences also in concert work. If it's not programmatic work, it's more abstract and different than in that sense than a film score would be, which has a program and a subject and an atmosphere and a period, a historic period, etc. All things that can be givens in film.
When you take on a new film, how do you begin? What's your process in terms of looking at a film and deciding what it needs emotionally or in terms of your sound palette?
Well, every assignment that I start, I begin with trepidation and a certain amount of self-doubt, I guess. It all feels like the first time. Maybe that's a good thing. Because you look at a film and think, what noise does it need? What sound? What emotion does it need? What art can it suggest? Did I say sustain? So a lot of thought about what to do, and I'm always challenging myself, and my own personality is such that I'm rarely ever satisfied with what I do. And I write something and look at it the next day and challenge it. Can it be better than this? Is there some way I can make it better? It's not good enough. And it's the beginning of each assignment is a testing, a literal testing of working out problems. In my case, it's for people with pencil and paper.
Do you have enough time with most of the schedules to take 4 or 5 days or a week to work out ideas before you actually start to write cues?
Every film is different, John. I mean, if you think about this, if I think about it, I tremble. The recent Star Wars Revenge of the Sith started with a 17-minute battle. Literally, the opening 17 minutes, it's all musical. So the orchestra has to bang away. So I wasn't able to sit around for 4 or 5 days, think about how I'm going to approach the first reel of this thing. Because how do you get through that? In my case, I sketch everything. Ken Hall, it's just the way I build it. And it's a 6.5-day, very tough work job of doing that. Star Wars I mentioned at the outset of this answer because it was made easier by the fact that there were 5 other films and I could refer to the Emperor's theme or to Darth Vader's theme in the 17 minutes. It wasn't like starting from scratch. So part of the answer is there never is enough time, and your technique can never be good enough, and your self-assurance can never be cemented enough, too much, to be able to develop and practice the facility that's needed. But another more recent case, Memoirs of a Geisha, has I think about 90 minutes of music in that, and I really sort of labored over that thing for a couple of weeks before I wrote very much, about trying to figure out what I thought would be the acceptable Orientalisms in it, and what kind of melodies to construct that would create the atmospheres that were needed and keep it in the boundaries of a taste and the synergy between Japanese music and Western Romantic music. Hard job, simple solutions, but those simple tunes are, for me, the hardest things to do, and take the most rewriting to come any questions about melody. I think that's the hardest thing